Charles Ponzi, the man who captivated the financial world and who was in charge of one of the most successful business investments in America. He had millions of dollars at his disposal and crowds of people lining up, literally begging him to take their money. Little did everyone know that Ponzi's business was built on nothing but lies. The whole thing was an outrageous scam, one which turned Ponzi into a very rich man, but ruined the lives of thousands of innocent people. Ponzi's deception was so extraordinary and infamous that even now, 100 years later, the scam still shares his name, the Ponzi scheme. So in this video, we're going to share untold truth of the man behind the scam and how to make millions of dollars with nothing but lies. Ponzi was born in Italy in 1882 to a hardworking postman and financially comfortable environment. Ponzi's grandparents and great-grandparents had all been successful businessmen, merchants, and public officials. The demotion to the working class really affected Ponzi from a young age and made him bitter and resentful. He wondered why he had to suffer for his family's failing fortunes. As a teenager, Ponzi inherited a modest sum of money following his father's death and used it to enroll in college as per his mother's wish. However, Ponzi had other plans. Instead of studying and going to class, he decided to burn through his savings by dressing in the latest fashions and eating at the fanciest restaurants in town. Then, at night, he would visit theater or the opera or some gambling at the casino with his wealthy friends. Nothing was too extravagant or too expensive for him, and one day, it all came crashing down around him. His inheritance money finally ran out. With incomplete education, he had no chance to earn handsomely. His uncle offered him work as a clerk, but the idea of finding a 9-to-5 job repulsed Ponzi, who considered himself too good for menial labor. He felt he had only one choice left: travel to America and strike it rich there. In 1903, Ponzi arrived in Boston aboard the SS Vancouver. He knew he let his mother down, and the only way to redeem himself was to return to Italy as a rich man. America proved to be a much-needed reality check for young Ponzi. He realized if he wanted to eat, he needed to work. Ponzi spent the next few years up and down the East Coast, from New York to Florida. He worked as a sign painter, a waiter, a grocery clerk, a dishwasher, a factory hand, an insurance salesman, and a sewing machine repairman. None of the gigs lasted long, though. Ponzi either quit because he hated the work, or he was fired because he tried to cheat the customers. In 1907, Ponzi traveled to Montreal, hoping that Canada would prove to be more welcoming and lucrative. And at first, things were looking up for him. He found work as a clerk at a bank that mainly served Italian immigrants, called Banco Zerossi. Unfortunately for Ponzi, his new job did not last long because his boss was a con man. Zerossi was using an age-old fraud known as robbing Peter to pay Paul. In other words, he was using the money from his newest clients in order to pay off his older ones. This allowed Zerossi to offer 6% interest rates on all deposits, which was double the average rate. However, his clients started getting suspicious when their relatives back home kept complaining that they were not receiving the money the bank was supposed to send. In mid-1908, the authorities began investigating the bank for embezzlement, at which point Zerossi filled a suitcase with all the cash he could carry and fled to Mexico, leaving his employees and his family to deal with the fallout from his scam. Not wanting to be the one who takes the fall, Ponzi intended to travel back to the United States so he didn't have to be involved in the investigation and fallout from Zerossi's scam. But before that, he did something very stupid. So that he would not have to start from scratch again, he forged a check from one of his bank's clients, a shipping firm called the Canadian Warehousing Company. Ponzi stole a blank check from the manager's checkbook and filled it out for $423.58. A believable and unsuspicious amount, thought Ponzi, but as soon as he tried to cash the fraudulent check, the bank teller easily spotted the fake signature and alerted the police. Ponzi got 3 years in prison at St. Vincent de Paul Penitentiary, but of course, this was just the start of Ponzi's crimes. After getting released on parole after 2 years, he immediately made plans to travel to the States again, but he didn't go alone. Instead, he took with him 5 Italian immigrants, all fresh off the boat without any proper papers, as he had been paid to smuggle these men into America. However, he got caught and was arrested once again. Still, Ponzi hoped that if he pled guilty, the judge would go easy on him and let him off with a small fine. But once the judge banged his gavel and passed sentence, Ponzi's heart sank. He was given another 2 years in a federal prison in Atlanta. After being released from jail for the second time, Ponzi had come up with all these different plans to get rich, but they all required money, and Ponzi was penniless. Ultimately, he found a decent position as a clerk with an import-export business called the J.R. Poole Company in Boston. Life in Boston was decidedly better for Ponzi the second time around, though. He was good at his job for a change and was promoted for it. There, Ponzi met 21-year-old Rose Necco and instantly fell head over heels for her. This feeling was mutual, and the two got married in early 1918. 6 months after the wedding, Ponzi quit his steady job at J.R. Poole and began looking for something new to do. He started off by joining his father-in-law's struggling wholesale fruit-selling business. However, Ponzi was unable to save the failing business and instead started his own import and export business, which became another failed venture. After that, he thought he should publish his own trade magazine and named the magazine The Trader's Guide and sent it for free to 100,000 companies, doubling the circulation number with each new issue. According to Ponzi's calculations, his initial mailing would cost him around $35,000, but he would make $80,000 in advertising income since he was certain that companies would be lining up around the block to publicize their services in his magazine. But it turned out nobody was interested. Nobody cared about his obscure little trade magazine. Then, when Ponzi went to his local bank to get a loan, he was denied harshly by bank manager. During his magazine's days, he learned about an international reply coupon, or IRC. Years earlier, Ponzi had learned about the concept of arbitrage, the strategy of buying and selling an asset in different markets in order to take advantage of the price difference and make a profit. In the case of IRCs, they were always exchanged for the same postage value regardless of the country, but they were purchased at slightly different prices, depending on fluctuations in the local currency. So in theory, Ponzi could buy an IRC in Italy, where the lira had taken a serious hit after the war, and then redeem it in the United States for American postage stamps, where he knew the dollar value would be slightly higher. He would then sell those stamps and make a tiny profit. Then, by scaling the operation to thousands, even millions of IRCs, he was looking at some serious money. This was Ponzi's new business plan, and on paper, it seemed not only like a good idea, but also perfectly legal. Arbitrage was a sound investment tactic that had been in use for centuries. So, in January 1920, Ponzi started a new company to handle what seemed to be his most promising business venture yet, and he called it the Securities Exchange Company. And fortunately for Ponzi, the truth was that the profits from the arbitrage of IRCs were so small that they would be completely wiped out by the costs of shipping the IRCs from one country to another. And yet, he refused to let go of this idea. Ponzi was convinced that this was his golden goose, his one-way ticket to the life of wealth and luxury that he always felt he deserved. So when the legitimate business proved unsustainable, he turned his idea into the infamous Ponzi scheme. After all, his plan to arbitrage IRCs sounded really good. So even though it actually wasn't good at all, maybe he could convince other people it would work and take their money. Now, at its core, the Ponzi scheme is similar to the classic fraud, robbing Peter to pay Paul, which Ponzi saw firsthand back when he was working for Banco Zerosi. It involves getting people to invest in a business opportunity by promising them huge returns in a short amount of time with little to no risk. However, their money never really gets invested. Instead, the fraudster keeps most of it for themselves, whilst giving some of the profits to earlier investors. When these early investors see such large returns, most of them agree to reinvest their profits back into the business to make even more money. Thinking it all seems to be working as advertised. Even though the scheme was named after Ponzi, he was not the first one to do it. A New York bookkeeper named William Miller used the same technique to con investors out of $1 million back in 1899. And outside of America, A German actress named Adele Spitzer may have operated the first known Ponzi scheme in history in the early 1870s. However, Ponzi took the idea to a whole new level. Using his system, Ponzi offered investors a staggering 50% return in 45 days, or a 100% return in 90 days. He claimed to have a vast network of agents all over the world who were buying IRCs in bulk and shipping them to America. If pressed for any details on his operation, Ponzi would refuse to divulge any information, simply claiming that he couldn't share all the details of how exactly it worked, as then it could potentially help his competition. Most banks, companies, and serious investors stayed away from Ponzi, but they were not the ones that Ponzi targeted. He wanted the people who used to be just like him, with more dreams than common sense, who were always looking for the best way to get rich quick. This meant he preyed on the people with very little financial literacy, often people in desperate need of money fast. Ponzi understood that his true talent was not dealing with finances, but dealing with people. He knew how to sell his business without appearing too eager or aggressive, as if it made no difference to him whether he got their money or not. Ponzi started out with the people in his own neighborhood and got 18 of them to invest in his first month. Once they were all paid their first round of profits, word started spreading fast, and soon thousands of people began crowding the streets outside Ponzi's office, desperate to invest their own money in this seemingly surefire opportunity. Month after month, Ponzi gained more and more clients, raking in over $250,000 a day at the peak of his operation. The Boston Post hailed him as a financial genius, which gave him yet more perceived credibility and thus more investors. Soon, Ponzi was finally able to live the life that he had always dreamed of. He moved into a giant mansion, bought a fast car, dressed only in expensive clothes, wore gold watches and diamond pins, and went on lavish first-class trips. It was the lifestyle that Ponzi always felt he deserved. But he did not get to enjoy it for long. By the start of the summer, less than 6 months after Ponzi launched his new venture, there were rumblings of doubt about his business. Initially, everyone was afraid to say anything, since Ponzi had successfully sued a financial analyst for libel who'd accused Ponzi of lying. After all, many early investors had been paid already, which Ponzi said was proof everything was legitimate. But then the Boston Post, the same newspaper that once proclaimed Ponzi a genius, started to investigate his operation. They brought in Clarence Barron, president of Dow Jones and manager of the Wall Street Journal, who spotted the obvious scheme. By his calculations, Ponzi would have needed to purchase 160 million IRCs, and yet there were only 27,000 in circulation in the whole world. In July 1920, the Post presented Barron's conclusions on the front page of the newspaper, decrying Ponzi as a fraud and prompting an investigation into his company. But the wheels of justice turned slowly, and Ponzi was able to ease the concerns of government officials by cooperating fully and even saying he'd stop taking in new investments while he was under scrutiny. But then Ponzi caused his own downfall by hiring William McMasters as his publicist. Unlike Ponzi, McMasters was an honest man who soon realized that his client was a fraud. He later said, "Ponzi is a financial idiot. He can hardly even add up. He sits with his feet on the desk smoking expensive cigars in a diamond holder and talking complete gibberish about postal coupons." With access to Ponzi's records, McMasters collected the evidence he needed and went to the Boston Post, where he wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning exposé detailing all of Ponzi's secrets. This time, the game was really up and the Ponzi scheme collapsed. Several banks had to declare bankruptcy, tens of thousands of people lost their life savings, and Ponzi himself was indicted on 86 counts of mail fraud. However, the conman managed to strike a deal and pleaded guilty to only a single charge of mail fraud, receiving just 5 years in federal prison, a relatively small amount given the huge amount of money stolen and the vast amount of lives he ruined. Ponzi was released after 3.5 years in prison, and this time, he was finally a changed man and ready to do some good in the world. You would think that, right? He literally tried a new scam immediately after getting released. Ponzi knew that the government wanted to either deport him to Italy or imprison him again on larceny charges. So he fled to Florida, where he planned to essentially repeat the Ponzi scam again. He started a new company, the Charpin Land Syndicate, and sought people to invest in property around Jacksonville. He offered even higher gains than before, saying he could get people a 200% return in just 60 days. The only problem was that the property he was selling was worthless swampland. This time, though, there were no takers. Ponzi's fraud was soon exposed, and he risked being sent to Massachusetts, where a lengthy sentence awaited him. Not wanting to go back to prison yet again, Ponzi changed his look and tried to travel to Italy as a sailor aboard a cargo ship. However, he was recognized and arrested in New Orleans. Ponzi was now a desperate man. He wrote to President Calvin Coolidge asking for mercy. He even appealed to Mussolini to intervene on his behalf. But of course, nobody listened. It was the end of the line for him. Pony served another 7 years in prison, and the man who came out was not the same as the one who went in. Ponzi was a broken mess who had lost all the charm and confidence that once made him so rich. As he faced deportation to Italy, his wife chose to stay behind in America and divorced him. Ponzi spent the rest of his years in poverty, with only memories to comfort him of the times when he had it all. He ended up in Rio de Janeiro, where he died in 1949 in a charity hospital and was buried in a pauper's grave, thus bringing to an end one of the most notorious tales of rags to riches to rags in history.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.